Hi, everyone. Welcome to Vintage Books Live. Tonight, I am super excited to have Kim Johnson with us. Kim is the author of This Is My America, which is a young adult novel. Super timely and wonderful and hard to read, but also just really, really beautiful. So I'm super excited to talk about it. And to open up with, Kim, if you could just talk a little bit about, without giving anything away, without, any spoilers for those who haven't had a chance to like read the flap copy of the book or anything. Can you tell them a little bit about what the book's about?
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today and speaking with you all. Um, and it's just something that as a debut writer, you never think it's going to happen. And so every time I'm so grateful that I have an opportunity to talk about my work. But This Is My America. It's about a 17-year-old Black girl by the name of Tracy Beaumont, whose father has been wrongfully incarcerated. And she writes letters to an organization called Innocence X, which really gives homage to the real life organizations, the Equal Justice Initiative and the Innocence Project. And her father is in his last year of his death sentence when her brother is then suspected of killing a local white girl. And so it's a story that deals with her trying to help her brother and her father. And it's what I call a social justice thriller.
That's a good name. Oh, that's a really good name for it. I hadn't thought about that. Is that a term that you coined or that is out there?
I stole it from Jordan Peele. So when I talk about I write social thrillers, I really love the term that Jordan Peele uses in his work, where he talks about sometimes our greatest horrors are actual realities, and talking about social commentary and using a lens of thrillers as ways to sort of engage your audience. And I felt like it really described the things that I
Yeah,
love.
yeah.
I love social justice and talking about these issues and voicing them. And I love thrillers and mysteries. And I'm like, yeah, I write social thrillers.
Yes, I love that. I'm going to have to remember it. Can you share a little bit about the book, how the book came to be? I'm especially excited about this for like small background information. I got to hear Kim read an excerpt from a book that she was working on. Oh gosh, I don't even know, like a long time ago.
Yeah, a really
And
long time ago.
so, and um I don't know, whenever somebody that I have heard read like at a conference or something then has a book come out, I don't know, for me it's almost like my book came out. Like I'm so excited for them. And so when I put the pieces together that like, oh wait, I know who that is. And yay. So I'm super excited to hear from you. How did this book come about and get picked up and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I'll say I'm the same way too, especially coming in sort of the Pacific Northwest area. We don't have a lot of writers, and so when we go to writers conferences, we often don't get. I mean, we have a lot of writers. We don't have a lot of published, traditionally published writers, and so I always latched onto anyone like, oh my god, they made it. That means I can
Yeah,
do
exactly.
it too. So yeah, and so This Is My America was the third book that I had ever written. So not published, it was my first book to be published, but the third book that I ever written.
Yeah.
And conferences actually were a really big way for me to writers retreats and other kinds of things, just to practice, just to get out there, learn about the industry. And I was really learning my voice. I think my first book was just what came to my head as like, oh, this would be so interesting. And I couldn't get a dream out of my head. And a lot of it was me learning how to write. My second book was me realizing that I loved writing and that I could write. I could write books.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I wanted to write what I loved to read in the young adult space. And then when at third book, I feel like that's where I really knew who I was, what I was trying to do with my work, the meaning behind my work. And it really draws on who I've always been, especially as a young
yeah.
person. And that's someone who was involved in social justice organizations, involved in activism, and so my story that I wrote really came out of working with the young people that I often work with, who were um, just sort of like starting up, paying attention to the Black Lives Matter movement of late 2014, early 2015, not the 2020 time period. And a lot of it was about, from my understanding of history, of social justice activism, especially around police brutality and sort of the larger issues of systemic racism. And I started to think about, could I tell a story to help my students? At the time, I was thinking, let me help let me write something. And I wanted to sort of like fuel myself in my story, to talk about the larger issue of systemic injustice, and how deeply rooted it is, and how cyclical it is, and how it goes generation after generation after communities within communities. And that's really where it came from. And I knew I wanted to write a story with a lot of the topics that I did, but it wasn't until I read Bryan Stevenson's Just Mercy in 2016. I can't recall, I think it was 2015. I immediately got pulled into thinking about the families. And that's where Tracy's story was born, that, like, the daughter of someone who is just fighting because when someone's on the, sentenced to death, waiting for their execution date to really occur, it's a lot of the families, especially when they've been wrongfully incarcerated and wrongfully accused. It's the families we're fighting. And that's really where the story came from, is thinking about that, and thinking about, could I open up the door in young adult space to talk more about something that isn't, there's not a lot of books that deal with this kind of issue.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
It's I have so many like things that I thought of when you were talking, and one of which was just the very basic understanding that I think a lot of people lack, not within the Black community, I know, but I think within other communities, is that 2020, like what happened in 2020 was sort of a culmination of things that had been going on. Well, I mean, it's really been going on for as long as anybody can remember, unfortunately. But I mean, I think as far as Black Lives Matter specifically, like it wasn't birthed in 2020. It's been something that has been in the community for longer than that. And I think it's kind of the same phenomena as like a singer that's an overnight sensation or whatever. Like there's all this legwork that's been laid behind it. But what gets seen in the public eye is just, oh, this just suddenly appeared. And it's like, well, no, not actually. But I'm just wondering, I'm just curious, as a writer, like living in that space where you are dealing with issues that are really crushing. Like there's things that, I guess from a personal perspective, that I desperately wish I could just fix it. And that it doesn't work that way, that it's just these all people working together to try to push it a different direction. And how did you find that story to, the whole story in like, oh gosh, I'm not stating this very well, but I guess it's like there's a story there that stands on its own, that isn't just crushing. That's this beautiful story about a family and the people that care about each other, and it has all these layers. And did you find that hard to find that when you're dealing with a topic that's just so incredibly real for so many families? And I just as a writer working in that space, like how do you maintain your ability to still be able to tell the story and just not be so discouraged that you just can't write anything?
I think as writers, you can only write things that you love. I mean, I believe it, although people can write
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
anything. But for me, if you're going to live in a space for a long time, you have to love
yeah,
what you
yeah,
do and love the story. And especially when there's a lot of issues, society issues, trauma, difficult, experiences, issues that sort of like come to arise, people receive them and respond to them in a lot of different ways. I know that there's some people when there's a lot of bad in the world, can't even watch it. And they have to turn away. They turn away to fantasy, or they turn away to romance, or they don't watch any TV. They spend time with friends. They do. So, people have different kind of responses to it.
yeah, yeah,
And I am someone, because I'm always been someone who gets involved. I'm a problem solver. If there's something that I see on the news or hear about, especially with my work, I think I'm able to do a lot of that action in the work that I do. Not this specific action, but just like take action when I see
yeah,
something
yeah,
wrong. It's where I lean into. So I'm immediately, if I see something wrong, I immediately go into, I want to understand what's happening, and I want to figure out how we can stop this from happening.
yeah,
And so that's the stories I often find myself writing. And it's interesting, especially being a Black writer, because oftentimes so much of the Black experience has often been told with just trauma, and
yeah, yeah,
not the building out of the family, and even
yeah,
recognizing that there's a whole story that's there. And often that's what's pushed. And so I know that there's a lot of Black writers who just won't even touch it. Like they just are like, I am so done with this
yeah,
because this
yeah,
is all that I see. And I think it's a very careful balance, especially me as a writer, because I need to also recognize that while I'm writing for the people who are like call to action, the people who are like,
yeah,
I do want to lean in, whether it's my own lived experience, connected experience because of my community, or outside experience, that might not be everyone. But I think oftentimes there's communities that actually have no touch to it, no experience with it at all, who have for too long haven't even leaned into it to
yeah,
even
yeah,
learn anything
yeah,
about it, which is sort of where we found ourselves in
yeah,
we found
for
ourselves in
sure. Yeah,
2020, like with such shock. And so many people are like,
yeah,
we were in the streets 5 years ago. And then the next generation, we were in the
yeah,
streets 20 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
And so that's where, and I think it's, while I can also still lean into it, you have to sort of like balance,
yeah,
taking
yeah,
breaks um, and, enjoying other things so that you can be true to the story as much as possible, and have a perspective that can work when you tell that kind of story.
yeah, yeah. And that actually segues into another question that I was going to ask, is because I do love the family moments in this book. Like one of them that I particularly thought was amazing was like the prison visitation, like it's it's so easy to be reductionist about stuff like that. And you talked about the fact that, and I think a lot of writers in minority groups, whether it be racial minorities or disability or neurodiversity or whatever, like I've heard multiple times from people that, well, if you're going to write, if you're going to write a story that represents that community, like it has to be about all the bad things that community faces, and that they get so, exactly what you said, they get so frustrated because it's like, well, we're just people living our lives and we don't get to write about that. We have to write about the trauma all the time.
Mhm.
And I think what I loved about the prison visitation particularly was it humanizes these moments. Like it made it's remembering that every single person that's being affected by these stories is a human being. honestly, when it gets right down to it, whether they did something to warrant being in prison or not, you're still dealing with human beings.
Mhm.
And I really appreciated that piece of it. And I just wonder if you could elaborate on, you did a little bit already, but like the family moments in this book, like sort of juxtapositioned with the thriller moments, and why you felt that was important.
Yeah, and I think I'll speak first on the visitation was so important to me, because I really wanted the humanity to be expressed, because at the end of the day, Tracy's father, James, is still her father. And I think that
Yeah.
there's a sort of like societal assumption that they see something on the news, there's a crime that occurred and
Yeah.
someone was arrested, and thank goodness I don't have to worry about that issue anymore. And
Right.
that's often how
Right.
we deal with our criminal justice system, as sort of like bystanders or
Yeah.
community folks,
Yeah.
is that, wow, we got that problem, someone's going to solve that problem with all those bad guys that are in
Yeah.
there.
Exactly.
And but it is very reductive to think of it in that way, and that's why I really wanted to express in the way that when I was reading, Just Mercy, and Brian Stevenson was talking about his visits and how he was just coming to see his clients time after time, and the kinds of conversations that they would have, um, and how he really just helped draw a picture of humanity. And I wanted to do that for Tracy's father, especially in viewing him as a Black man, who's been incarcerated. And that's why I didn't have sort of the very traditional, they had to speak through the phone. And I really wanted them to be present at the table, father, daughter, husband, wife,
Yeah. Yeah.
moments, so that we can have some of that tenderness. Because to me, that's that, when you can draw on the humanity, you can draw on the
Yeah.
call to action as well.
Yeah.
That might not be my situation, but if there's something wrong, that like maybe I should pay attention to why that's happening. And I think that's just with storytelling, especially as a Black writer, it being so important to show the full selves experiences. um because as human beings, we're not these sort of like, this life experience happened, and so now this is the only thing that defines you,
Yeah.
and who you are, and you're not eating dinner at the table anymore, you're not going to school anymore, all the things
Yeah.
that actually you are
Yeah.
doing, you're still doing and involved in. And so I wanted to draw the full family picture of the younger sibling and the older sibling, and the dynamics with the neighbors and the community friends, and what those relationships were like, because I really wanted that characterization to feel real,
Yeah. Yeah.
because so much of the story is real,
Yes. Yeah.
in so many ways.
Well, and there's just, oh gosh, there's just so much about this that I just feel is so, so important. And I think that that piece of it is really just core of not ever making someone just this flat sort of stereotypical character, that's filling some vision of, society's
Mhm.
vision of whatever people are if they get into the prison pipeline, but that every single person that got there is a human and had struggles, and there are reasons why people end up there. And a lot of times, I would say probably 100% of the time, those reasons have to do with issues that are bigger than them and bigger than the community. So I was so glad to see this sort of juxtaposition between this big sort of inhuman sort of steamroller of a system versus this very human people just trying to figure out how to survive within it. And that was just really neat writing and just very powerful. And I'm curious what you think. It's easy to get very overwhelmed by all of that. And I'm curious as a writer and for readers, like what role do you feel like the act of reading and writing plays in all of this? Because sometimes it can feel like writing books, reading books is, obviously not nearly enough, but it's a piece, it's a piece of it. And I'm curious what your thought is on just the role of reading and writing in the larger picture.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, it's the easiest way for someone to empathize, to learn empathy,
Yeah.
especially when we think about core readers, young readers. But even I've had so many people at all ages, retired communities, in senior homes that are like
That's
reading my
great.
book and getting emails from them. And it draws you in a way that I think film and television can, but maybe not as deeply, because especially as
Yeah.
much time as you spend as a reader, um, being in a character's head and reading what they're thinking and really sort of engaging that way. And I think it makes you feel like you know the people, which is very helpful, especially for communities that maybe don't know anyone who
Yeah.
looks
Yeah.
like the
For
Tracy's family,
sure.
or has
Yeah.
experienced what Tracy's family has experienced. And I do think that reading widely and diversely, especially when so many generations haven't had as much opportunity because of the lack of
Yeah.
representation,
Yeah.
and even thinking about intersectionally across communities that have different kinds of experiences and ways in
Yeah.
which they
Yeah.
live. I do think that there's a huge part to play in terms of making change, because yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I do think it's so important. I also think it's important. You do have to lift your head a bit, and not get so lost in the books. It's important to get lost in the books,
Yeah.
but to realize, especially if you're reading contemporary works, and especially if you're reading works like mine that do open up to systemic problems in our society,
Yeah.
that there are other responsibilities that you might have, even if it's as simply as voting
Yeah.
on particular issues,
Yeah.
or educating yourselves on particular issues, or read more about, well, I wonder how this impacts my community.
Yeah.
Let me read about what's happening in my community. I think even if it's that, like, dipping into that, I
Yeah.
think it's important.
Yeah.
I hope
No,
I answered your question. I'm not quite sure
yeah,
if
no,
I.
I purposely left it open-ended because it is kind of one of those questions that's always interesting to me as a writer, that, when there's so many big problems in the world, like, how is my writing, like, really, fitting in? What role is it playing? What should I be doing? And that kind of thing. So I'm always curious to ask writers, how they see
Mhm.
their work. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's been an interesting journey for me in the last few years, because I've, personally come to realize how much I was not seeing, how much you think that is, particularly living in the Pacific Northwest in a little bubble where you're not exposed to that kind of stuff. So I think for me personally, I feel like these books are really important and powerful, because I think it's very easy to sort of look around you and see and think that a lot of these problems are better, that they've, they're not gone, but they're not very common, and then to really come to terms with the fact that no, this is not gone, and it's a huge problem, and it's systemic, and it's affecting so many people. And so I'm always happy to see new stuff come out on the shelves. And in my role as bookseller, it's so interesting to me to look at, because we sell used books and new books, and it's so interesting to me to see where we are now versus where we were, oh gosh, even like 10 years ago, because the new bookshelf, when we're bringing new books in, we have so many better choices now than we used to. And I'll be going to make a display and I'll be like, okay, well, here's my used new books for this display. And there's a big old handful of them because we really try to bring books in that represent a really wide diversity of people. And then you go to the used book section and you're trying to do the same thing. And the books just aren't there. And so it really does hit you like how badly we were doing and how really utterly and vital it is that we're supporting writers from all different backgrounds. So, and that was way longer
Example
than
of
I
the change. No, I was just
But-
thinking about that's such a great example to recognize the change. Being in that kind of environment. Yeah.
But we're so not there yet either, because I think you made a point
Mhm.
about, I think the one thing that still isn't being adequately recognized is like communities within communities, like not reducing, okay, well, the entire, Asian American experiences, here's this one book, right?
Yeah.
Or the entire Black experience, the entire disability experience, like that all those communities have, there's towns around the world and the cultures in each town are a little bit different. And, there's not one person that speaks for the whole community. And so we need lots and lots of stories from these communities and not just, 5 or something.
Yeah.
So while I think we're on the right track, we're so far away from really being fully representational. So I wanted to close by asking you if you would kindly elaborate. Kim posted on her Instagram last couple weeks, that maybe possibly there might be news about This Is My America.
Yeah. So, I I don't know how to do my intro.
Yeah.
This Is My America the rights were bought by a production company, and it will be a TV series on HBO Max. So it's really exciting, and it's pretty amazing. It's surreal. Like I don't even know how to I don't even know how to like say it. Like, how do I say that this amazing thing is happening?
I saw that and I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
it sounds like it's past and so for those of you who don't know how all this like technical stuff works in the publishing industry, but usually like the option to make a film is purchased by a company, and that just means they have the right to do it, but it doesn't always mean they're gonna do it. But this sounds like they're actually gonna do it, which is like super exciting.
Yeah, well, we're at least a step closer, right?
Yeah.
The industry is
well, at least there's a company,
but there's a company and HBO Max. I'm so excited, because I think it's just such a great place for it to be the home for it. So
now I'm gonna have to subscribe to another service.
I know, I have so many. It's so bad.
That's great. No, I would gladly do it. That's so awesome. And then I was wondering, you mentioned a book that you had influenced you. You said it was Just Mercy. Is that correct?
Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. And he is the founder and director of the Equal Justice Initiative. He's made it his life's mission to he's a lawyer. He's made his life's mission to represent those that have been wrongfully incarcerated, especially around the death penalty sentences. And he talks a lot about justice. And so the book is a memoir. And that they also made a movie out of it maybe 2 years ago at time. I don't know, 3 years ago, maybe.
I don't know. 2020 hit and the time lost all meaning.
Yes.
And did you have any others, like a couple other books that you recommend that you think are really valuable for people to pick up?
Yeah, I think especially related to this topic, nonfiction related, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And if you're not that into, nonfiction. I think you could pair it with the documentary The 13th, which really covers the New Jim Crow, and it's such a great pairing, I think, together. So
Thank you. Yeah, I will try to put those in the comments too, so people can look those up afterwards. But thank you so much, Kim. This was so fun, and I'm glad it finally worked out for us to
yeah,
chat.
I'm glad it worked out for us. It's so great to see you again. And I love how our paths, in the writing world, they
so
cross in
much.
that way.
Oh,
So
I can picture the scene that you read all those years ago. So I'm so excited. And good luck with all the stuff you're working on and all of that. And keep us posted on social media, because I'm very excited to find out when it's coming out. And
yes, definitely.
And all of that good stuff. So.
Yes, definitely.
All
yes.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have
everyone.
a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.